The decade of the 1970s not only brought lots of honors to Ted for his teaching, but it also brought lots of funny stories home from things that happened with the students. And he also received a lot of notoriety or attention from the church. He was elected an elder at Central Christian Church, and that meant serving communion at the tables on Sundays and taking it to shut-ins. And also he was one term as chairman of the board of the church. And my teaching career was coming along too. My first year to teach was at Lacey Lakeview School in the Conley district, and I taught 4th grade. And at the end of that year, one of the first grade teachers who had taught 1st grade for 35 years was retiring. And so Mr. Cochran, the principal of the school, asked me to move into that position, and I did. I enjoyed teaching the little ones. It was nice when they came in and you learned their letters and learned words and began to read stories, and excitement because they could go to the library and check out a book now that they could read. And the same thing with numbers. They learned their subtraction as well as addition, and how to tell time and counting money. And it was an interesting time to teach. And on our moving to the house near Lorena in '75, I had done 1st grade there 2 years, and I applied at Lorena for a school position, but there were not any available. So that first year after we lived there, I went on back to school at Lakeview teaching 1st grade, and rode with Ted as he went to TSTI. He would drop me off and go on to school. It worked out pretty well because the girls could ride the school bus both ways. And as Alicia was approaching her 16th birthday, she was learning to drive and would soon have a used car to drive back and forth to school and for band practice and different things like sports that she took part in, because she played basketball and she ran track, like the 100 and 200-yard dashes and the relays. And so that worked out well. I also made some great friends teaching at Lacey Lakeview. And on my 3rd year there, when I was going back and forth with Ted, I was invited by some of the other teachers to join the ADK with them. ADK stands for Alpha Delta Kappa, which is an international teachers sorority that works for excellence and altruism and world understanding in teaching. It was started in 1947 up in Missouri, and it branched out, and that I was to be in one of the chapters in Waco, Texas. Cecile Green, who was the other 1st grade teacher, and Nell Grissom, one of the 2nd grade teachers, were the 2 ladies that sponsored me to join Alpha Delta Kappa. And I was initiated into that in April of 1976. And that became a great part of my life through my teaching and camaraderie with other teachers. The superintendent of Lorena retired, and they hired a new man, and it turned out to be somebody who had been an assistant superintendent at Conley, and I knew him. And he called me up, and he said, "What are you doing driving all the way to Conley to teach when you could work at Lorena?" And I said, "Well, I've applied at Lorena, but there weren't any openings." And he looked at my application, and he hired me for this next year because there was going to be an overload in 1st grade. They knew because of kindergarten and pre-enrollment. Actually, Lorena School was beginning to really grow. The community was growing. lots of younger families moving in. The school itself was on one big lot together. At one end of the school was junior high and high school classes. In the middle was the auditorium, a gym, the principal's and superintendent's offices, and the cafeteria, and all that. And at the other end had been the elementary. And the elementary was what was outgrowing everything. And so my first year to teach, I was actually in a portable building there at Lorena when I first taught at Lorena. One that my husband's classes had built in his shop. They bought 3 portable buildings. One was turned sideways near the back of the elementary, and it was made into boys' restrooms on one side and girls on the other, and attached well against the bathroom of the main campus, main building. The other 2 were turned lengthwise with 2 doors in it and facing each other and a tile walkway in between. And you talk about an overload. There were 60 first graders that year. Mrs. Brigham, the other teacher, and me, we both had 30 students each in a little 16 by 30 building. Only room for a center aisle, but we taught them to read, do their numbers. And when they went for lunch, we walked around the outside of the building and into the cafeteria and back. And in the main building were 2 second grades, 1 4th grade, 1 5th grade, and 1 6th grade, and 1 room for special ed and speech teachers combined. And the 2 3rd grades were actually housed in the church building about a block away, and they had to walk all the way from the church to lunch. Unless it was raining, they'd send a school bus after them to come to the cafeteria. Well, that went on until April of that year, and the new school that they were building, new elementary school, was finally completed. The maintenance men came and picked up all their desks, and then when we moved during a school day, the kids picked up their chair and carried it out, and they loaded them on pickup, and they got on the bus, and we rode over, and they got their chairs and everything, the desks were there, and we moved in April of that year, and then we had the last month of school in the new building. It wasn't long before there were 2 classes of every grade, and even kindergarten, because that one year they had registration for 3 sets of twins and 1 set of quadruplets, all in the same year. We wondered what was going on with the water in Lorena. That's what everyone said, with so many new babies. Well, it was an interesting time to teach, and I did enjoy it. And my girls were doing well. Elisha played in the band as well as her sports, and in her junior year, she was the star in UIL, a performance of Arsenic and Old Lace for their contest. And that was an interesting thing. And Angela began to play band in 6th grade, a trumpet, and she played softball in the summer, Little League. And then they both went to camp, Girl Scout and or church camp, those things. And one summer, even Angela and I played in a mother-daughter league. She was 15 and I was 45, so that was pretty interesting. I guess my last time to ever play softball. But things went well, and in '75, we also got our first grandchild. Gwendolyn Delane Babb was born to Ted and Paula on October 24th, 1975, and spent her first Christmas at our home there south of Lorena. I made her a stocking to go right along with everybody else's, and that was a nice time. And my teaching went well, and Ted's work continued. But in '78, when Alicia graduated from high school, she graduated third in her class, and she decided to go on to college. And before that happened, I guess it was when Gwen was about 3.5 to 4 years old. Ted was working for Cablevision. And after a rainstorm, he was sent to check out the antenna on one house that the TV wasn't working. And he was on the top of a 2-story house, which was real slippery and wet, and he lost his footing and slid off into the flower bed below, digging about a foot-deep trench in there with his feet, and fell back across a wooden, brick planters, and broke not only his back, but one of his arms. And he was in the hospital. And with the broken back, he was laying flat, and one arm he couldn't use, he couldn't feed himself. So Paula would go by and feed him breakfast before she went to work. And then Alicia would come from MCC, where she was going to college, and stop and feed him his lunch. And at that time, she said, I think I might like to be a nurse. And so at the next time when nursing school opened, she enrolled into the MCC nursing program. And she got her RN from that in 1981, yes. Well, Ted went home from the hospital after a few months, but he still could only lie flat or stand up. He couldn't sit with the back injury. So Gwen stayed home with him, and she was between 3.5 and 4, and she said, I take care of my daddy every day. I get him a drink of water or a Coke out of the refrigerator, and I make him a sandwich for lunch. And that was how things went. And Ted occupied his time by reading or watching TV or working puzzles, standing, working, doing things he could do standing. He even built a little ship in a bottle while he was recuperating. And when he got well enough to go back to work, Cablevision wanted to send him to a high-rise apartment building to work in the elevator. And he said, I can't do it. I might fall again. And so he quit that job. And they moved in with us for a while. He went back to school at TSTI for the 1-year building construction plumbing program. And he did finish that. And then after a while, when he was settled in school and doing better, they moved onto the campus. And then Paula became pregnant again, and we had our second grandchild, which was a boy, Dennis Leon Babb, named for his Ted's grandfather and his brother. So it would have been DL's grandfather and uncle, and called DL as the brother had been. That was in 1980. And so we had 2 grandchildren now, and things were going along pretty well. At school, it was funny because we had to do our own things in music and PE just like we had in the other school. Finally, they hired a librarian, and so we could take the children to the library and get a few minutes off to work on things. And we always had to give a PTA program. Once we did the April program, and we did an Easter bunny thing, and Ted actually brought a life-size like dollhouse for us with door and window and roof like for the children to hide behind as a prop and put on the stage. And we did this neat little program with our first graders hunting Easter eggs. And what a delight it was for the kids. He delivered it on a Saturday. When they came into school on Monday morning, the PTA program was at night, there was that dollhouse sitting on the stage. They got all excited, and we had a huge crowd for PTA that night. Another one that we really was a hit was the year that we had 70 first grade students between the two teachers, 35 apiece, Ms. Brigham and I. And she said, "What are we going to do with these kids? We can't even get 70 kids on that stage in the cafeteria." And I said, "Well, let's have it in the gym. We have a 3-ring circus. There's 3 rings on the floor, and we're having that every day anyway," and we laughed. But then we did decide it might be a good idea, because that year they had also hired a PE teacher, and she agreed to help us with the program. It turned out really well, although she had said, "What are we going to do with this certain little boy that was usually the disruptor, troublemaker of class?" I said, "I know what we're going to do with him. We're going to make him the ringmaster." I knew, because he was in my first grade class, that he was very intelligent and he just needed challenges. He had actually come to kindergarten already reading. And in my first grade class, although he did some of the activities along with the other children, I had to put him in a special SRA kit for advanced reading, and he was already reading beyond the 3rd grade level when he left my room. Well, we made him the ringmaster, and his mother was so excited that he wasn't in trouble that she made him a fancy little coat with fringe on the shoulders and a top hat as a ringmaster. And he stood up there and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, welcome to the Lorena first grade parade of circus of stars." And they marched in, and the program went well. He announced ball handling, and 1 ring of the circus were bouncing the balls, and 1 were tossing them back and forth, and another was dribbling. And then they did that a little bit, and they sat down, and then the next group, apparatus handling, and 1 group had those little things like a cone that you pitch the ball back and forth and catch it, and the other group was hula hooping, and the special ed people got into it, and with their kids, they made little lions headpieces, and their kids were the little lion act. And so it was a really neat program. Parents were excited to see what their kids were learning in school, in PE as well as regular school. And one dad said, "That's the best PTA program we ever had." Well, that was fun. You just made do with what you had if you had a large class. But the next year then, from then on, the state came out with a law that you could not have more than 22 in your lower grades. So a 3rd teacher was hired for first grade, and eventually for all the classes. We always went to family reunion in the summer in San Angelo. The young reunion was my mother's family, and they began the reunion the year after my grandmother, Hulda, died. She died about 6 or 7 years after Grandpa Gus had died. And they said, the 9 children said, if we don't all get together every year, we'll lose touch. And so they would all come back on the 2nd weekend in July for a 2-day reunion. And we always went because my mother was still alive, and she looked forward to that every year, seeing her sisters and brothers and nieces and nephews and all. And that was one of the things that we always did. This year, we will have our 50th Young Reunion at the same time, the second weekend in July. And we plan to go. There's only one of my mother's sisters left, though it's all the next generation, and I'm now the oldest living grandchild. Well, that was a lot of things that we did in the summer with sports and church camps and all those sorts of things. But also, in the summer of '79, Ted and I went on a trip, just the two of us. He took me to Red River, New Mexico for our 25th wedding anniversary celebration. We had married in April and we didn't go until June, but it was because we were both teaching. But that was a neat time, just the two of us. And he gave me a new ring at that time. He had had it designed and made at Nathan's Jewelers in San Angelo, unbeknownst to me. And it was gold, fairly wide band, and had three little, looked like logs on it, and then three diamond rings inserted with those. He said that we've had 3 kids and we've been married 25 years. This is sticks and stones of the 25 years. And of course I had to laugh. He still loved to tease me, even after all that time. Ted's plumbing, when he graduated, Ted Jr., when he graduated, he went to work for Anderson Plumbing Supply and did really well. I was soon manager of the warehouse, knew all the plumbers in town, and was doing really well. And Paula was still working, and they bought a home on 62nd Street in Waco, near school where Gwen would be starting to Parkdale when she turned 6 years old. And so our life was going along, and things were really great. We loved our new home. Ted enjoyed working in the yard, and he loved the neighbors and people around that we met, pitched horseshoes and different things with the kids around. And pretty soon, it was the 80s. The 80s brought a lot of different things. In 1982, Angela also graduated from Lorena High School, and she graduated as valedictorian and planned to attend college also. And then Ted and I would be empty nesters. But that didn't slow us down. And my next episode will be on the decade of the 80s.